Welcome to A Word Fitly Spoken, a podcast about Jesus, His Word, and our joy in following Him. I'm Michelle Leslie.
And I'm Amy Spreeman. Welcome to part 2 of our 3-part series on dying, death, and funerals. You know, death can be a scary, painful thing, but it's our desire that this series will remind you of the hope that we have in Christ.
That's right. That was our goal last time as we explored what the Bible says about death and what it doesn't say about certain aspects of death that we have to use biblical principles to make wise decisions about. And if you haven't listened to part 1, you'll want to hit pause here and go back and listen to it before moving on to today's episode.
Yeah, that's right. We don't want you to miss out on the joy and hope that Scripture brings, and that's what we spent most of part 1 talking about. Next time, part 3 of this series will be a Glad You Asked episode, answering your questions about dying, death, and funerals. And you all sent in some great questions that we hadn't thought about, and we're looking forward to sharing your comments and answering those questions.
Right. We have some very astute listeners who want to make sure that they're handling this issue biblically. And it's always great to hear from sisters in Christ who are striving for godliness in every aspect of their lives. So today we're going to talk about how to handle some of the practicalities of death and funerals, plus some thoughts on ministering to the bereaved. And of course, as Christians, the Bible will also inform how we handle those practical details.
Yeah, let's start things off by talking about preparing for death. Now, in part 1, we talked about how to prepare spiritually, but what about preparing to leave your family and your things behind? Well, your death will cause enough emotional upheaval for your family. You don't want it to cause any additional stress that you could mitigate before you die with good preparation. Now, many people think that all they need to do is communicate what they want their funeral to look like. Nope, you need to start getting your ducks in a row. And if you haven't started yet, well, no time like the present. My parents are 88, and it was only this year that my brother and I realized that they had nothing more than a couple of urns that, by the way, we can't find, their funeral plots picked out and paid for, paperwork and receipts not yet located, and my mom's couple of old hymns that she picked out on a piece of paper that, again, we can't find right now. So anyway, I got the ball rolling on the legal stuff while we searched for the missing items and got at least the paperwork taken care of. And then following that, my husband and I went through the process for ourselves. And the good news is it's not all that hard, and you really don't need an attorney to get started. There's a couple of legal documents you're going to want to have in a safe place, and most of these will need to be notarized by a notary public who will witness you signing them, and then you may want a couple of additional witnesses as well. In fact, some states' signatures from witnesses who aren't a notary, those are required. You have to have some extra witnesses. And then the notary will give them the official stamp as proof that you are you. So why do we need documents? Well, because if you don't direct what happens to your body, your finances, and all your stuff, someone else is going to do it for you, and it won't be whom you might like to have picked. So you may end up with a hospital staff person determining your care, or a courtroom judge deciding things about your property in spite of who your next of kin is. I personally know of several families whose estates ended up in probate court for many months because their dearly departed did not have the paperwork in place. So, Michelle, are you ready to start talking about legal papers?
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to hearing about what you've learned, Amy, because my parents have been kind of exactly the opposite. They've, set up a trust for all, and a will and everything. They've got all of their ducks in a row, and I've got it all on a thumb drive. And I've been to visit the attorney and everything. And I just appreciate so much how they have gotten all that set up. But their situation is a little different than our situation. And so I think I need to hear, what you've found out as well, because a combination of the two is probably what my husband and I are going to need. And we need to start thinking about that too. So yes. I am ready. Let's hear it.
All right. And good on you for having that on a thumb drive too. We did the same thing. We have it on a thumb drive. We have the papers in a file in the safe. We did get a little safe that we keep in our house, and then and the kids have the combination. So that's good. I mean, you want to have it everywhere. Okay, so let's get started off here. The number one document you're going to want to start with is a living will. It is one of the most common and necessary while you're still alive documents, and this is going to determine what kind of medical care you do and don't want should you be in a situation where you can't make decisions or speak for yourself, whether through an accident or illness. You're going to want one of these even if you're not actively dying. A living will is also known as an advanced directive, or advanced care directive, some people call them, that details your desires regarding medical treatment, including emergency, ICU, or palliative care, and hospice care. For instance, do you wish to avoid being on a ventilator or dialysis? Do you feel strongly one way or another about signing a DNR, which stands for Do Not Resuscitate? So the Advanced Directive or Living Will form spells out all the options and some that you might not have even thought of so that your loved ones and your doctor and hospital staff know exactly how you want to be cared for and how you don't. And in that form, you'll also appoint one or more people to make decisions for you in case you can't. So for my parents, for example, they will decide for each other as a first tier, and then my brother and I are listed as deciders just in case they are not able. So now we have the deciding power, or also known as power of attorney, not only to help them with medications, but we're also the go-to people now who get the phone calls when mom or dad is admitted to the hospital or has had some other medical incident like a fall or a reaction to a prescription, even questions about insurance billing. Power of attorney will get you around those HIPAA privacy laws. So where do you get one of these forms to fill out? Well, your doctor's office and your local hospital have these documents on hand, for, blank sheets for you to fill out. And for my parents, we got one for each of them and filled it out last fall when my mom was in the hospital. And it led to some great family conversations, by the way. And the hospital social worker at the time just happened to be a notary, so we had signed them in front of her. So if you want to download the forms online rather than going to your doctor's office, your state's attorney general's office has these forms, and you can just download them online. Just make sure you wait to actually sign the forms until you can do it in front of the notary and your witnesses. Now, obviously, it goes without saying, it doesn't help if you fill one of these out and have it notarized and then go home and stuff it in a drawer. You want to give a copy to your doctor, your local hospital, and to your people listed as deciders. Keep the original form in a safe place, maybe a file, maybe a safe. You can always change it and update it too as needed, but if you don't, want to give it to those who can enforce it, your medical treatment will not reflect what is written in your living will. So that's the living will.
That's really good advice. I'm sort of taking notes here as you're speaking, Amy, so that I can have that for myself personally. But so that's good information about the living will and the power of attorney and everything. What about the will dealing with your property and everything after you're gone?
Yeah, that's the next one. Your last will and testament, the legal document that directs what happens to your financial and physical assets after you die. If you have a lot of complex accounts and property or whatnot, all sorts of things like that, you may want to use an attorney, but you don't have to. We didn't do that. You can keep things simple with a downloadable form, a notary, and some witnesses. We have a notary at our church, a nice lady who that happened to be her job. And we also grabbed two friends one morning after our church service and got it all done. And it just takes some time to determine who's going to do what needs to be done after you're gone. So, you'll have to do the legwork ahead of time, but it only takes just a little bit of time to do, get it all signed. So I'm going to give you 4 things to think about. The first thing you're going to need to think about with your final will is your executor. Now, the executor of your will is the person that you want to be in charge of carrying out your wishes. It can be a family member, a close friend, an accountant, or a lawyer, and it's a good idea just to pick one person, like maybe the oldest child, as is traditionally done, and just let everyone know ahead of time that kid number 1 is the executor. Now, this person is responsible for settling your estate, estate, which includes settling your debts if you have any. So just be sure to keep good records of all your assets and debts so that your executor will have an easy time handling them when you die. We've got a file at our house that has, kind of all of those things, credit cards, blah, 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 those things. And then the second thing you're going to think about is leaving your assets to beneficiaries. So who gets your stuff, in other words? Carefully take an inventory of all the financial and physical assets that you want to distribute from your estate, and then name each person who's going to receive those assets. You don't have to list everything you own, but just the big things that you want to make sure goes to that right person. And the third thing, if it applies to you, is nominating guardianship. So let's say that you're leaving behind a pet or a dependent child or other dependent person. It's important, critical, that you state your choice of who will be that person or pet's guardian. I have 13 chickens, and I have yet to pick the lucky person who's going to inherit those. Maybe it'll be Michelle. But I'm betting that, Lord willing, the girls will go before I do. You never know, though. Only he knows. Right?
I'll pass.
Oh, come on.
We're not zoned for chickens here.
Free eggs, Michelle. Come on. Anyway. And then the fourth and final thing I just want you to think about is making charitable gifts. So you can spell that out in your will as well. You may want to donate a physical or financial asset to a charity or an organization. And explicitly stating this in your will ensures that this donation will be made out of your estate. Now, Michelle and I are going to talk a little bit more about charity after a bit here, but bottom line is a last will and testament gives you control over your belongings after you die. And if you don't have one, your assets would be settled by the court during probate court or a probate process. Again, be sure to store your will in an easily accessible place inside a fireproof safety deposit box. You can also have a copy stored at your attorney's office if you have one. You can update it at any time, but again, this has to be notarized each time you do that in front of witnesses. Now, unlike your living will and advance directive, there's no need to share your final will with your beneficiaries ahead of time unless you really want to. Michelle, the next two legal forms are the durable financial power of attorney and the durable medical power of attorney. Now, like I mentioned before, the medical power of attorney is often included in your living will, advance directive, but there is a separate signature sheet that serves the same purpose. So you don't have to have one of these, but let's just say you want to. And this allows the person with medical power of attorney to handle your medical decisions if you become incapable of making your own. So they're going to enforce your living will. But if you don't have a living will, this little form, and it's just nothing more than a one-pager, your durable medical power of attorney form will give that person you choose to make the medical decisions on your behalf. Now, a durable financial power of attorney gives the person you name the ability to take care of your financial responsibilities if, again, you were to become incapacitated. Now, again, this is while you're still alive. You allow this person access to your bank accounts to make deposits, pay bills. They can talk to your credit card companies, your utilities folks, etc. They can collect benefits and file and pay your taxes on your behalf. But once you die, that goes to the executor, not the person that you name as your financial power of attorney person, as I mentioned before. And then lastly, I want to mention two more forms that my husband and I have. These are extras. And again, one is a medical HIPAA release form, which can be part of your advance directive or living will, as well as the organ donor and do not resuscitate checkboxes. So again, they're separate, but they're also included in your living will. So check with your state's attorney general's office, and you can also grab those extra forms and have them notarized just to make sure. That's what we did with the HIPAA and the organ donor and the DNR forms, even though our wishes are already included in our advance directive form. Woo! Michelle, are you still with me? I hope I didn't bore our listeners with all of that. Really, I think it's important stuff. And we didn't even talk about planning for your funeral or your memorial service yet, so we'll get there.
No, that's really, really helpful information. I know it is for me because we're at that age that we have to start thinking about stuff like that. I'm sure we should have already started thinking about stuff like that, but you just never really think it's going to happen to you.
Right.
You're just so busy on a day-to-day basis living your life that you don't think about preparing for your death a lot of times. Look, listeners, none of that stuff is fun. A lot of it is a bunch of boring paperwork and red tape that most normal people have zero interest in. But it's one way that you can be a servant to your family and show love and care for them. But what about the other side of the coin? What if you're a friend or a loved one of the deceased? How can you and your church show respect for the person who died and love and care for his or her family? Well, let's start by talking about funerals. My husband is a retired minister of music, and he and I have both been church musicians most of our lives. So I have been to a lot of funerals. I mean, a lot, and I've seen some awesome ones. And I've seen some things that would make you wonder what planet some of the attendees or the bereaved were from. So how about a few helpful hints about funerals and wakes for the bereaved, the attendees, and the churches who host them?
Absolutely. Well, comportment, or the way we conduct ourselves or behave at a funeral, is one of the most obvious ways that we can show respect. And often it's the little things that count. Now, for various reasons, sometimes people laugh or smile at a wake or funeral. That doesn't mean that they didn't love the deceased or that they don't miss him or her. But this isn't a comedy club either, so, try to contain yourself if you're amused by something. If it's a visitation and the family is remembering something funny about their loved one, join in. My father-in-law's visitation before the funeral was it was amazing, Michelle, full of laughter because of all the hilarious stories and memories of him that people were sharing. But then the next day at the funeral service, it was a little bit more respectable and somber.
Yeah, Amy, I have the hardest time with, containing myself like that. If the person who died isn't someone that I knew well. And at weddings too, I'm just really a 12-year-old. My husband is the mature one. I'm sitting there, seeing little things that are funny and trying not to laugh at them or whatever. Somebody will say or do something that strikes me as funny, and I just can't stop giggling, But on the flip side, different cultures express grief differently. So it may be totally appropriate for there to be a room full of loud weeping and wailing at certain funerals. But if you're the only attendee who's doing this, others may not be able to hear the service. It may be a little disconcerting to other people. So, we all feel sad, and sometimes it is very hard to control ourselves, but do try to be aware of your surroundings if at all possible. Whether you're laughing or crying, sometimes it takes a lot of effort to maintain your composure.
Yes, and we want to not only maintain our composure, we want to maintain our place on the pew. In other words, stay seated during the service. So remember to take time to visit the ladies' room. I know it sounds trite, but you think of these things. These little details mean a lot. If you're visiting the ladies' room before the service starts, you might be embarrassed by having to get up and walk out in the middle of it.
Right. And this can be a big one when everybody's emotional and on edge. Wakes and funerals are not a time or a place for family feuds or for airing grievances about the deceased. We want to exercise self-control. Keep it to yourself. If someone is antagonistic towards you or hurts your feelings, remember how Jesus responded at his trial. Isaiah 53:7 says, "He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. Like a lamb that's led to slaughter and like a sheep that is silent before its shearers, so he did not open his mouth." Sometimes it's better, just not to say anything.
Yeah, that's right. And sometimes keeping your mouth shut can actually save the day. And speaking of which, during funerals, sometimes there's an open call for people to stand up and say a few words about the dearly departed. The key word in this phrase is few. Share a brief and appropriate fond memory or something you appreciate about the deceased. If you didn't know the person well, or if you're not family, it might be best not to be the first one on your feet. Just wait. See if there are, others who are waiting to share, and give them the space to do it. Sometimes there's a brunch afterward, and then the microphone is passed around again while people eat so that more people can share. That might be, if you don't know the person well, the best time for you to do that, especially, if you're not family or a dear friend or something like that. And it goes without saying that if you do say something, keep your language respectful and avoid any temptation to air grievances, like Michelle said, or personal, private, or embarrassing details, or a long, long speech aimed at the bereaved or attendees.
Right. And unless you've specifically been asked to say something, you might consider whether or not you need to say anything at all. If this part of the service is going on and on and on with no end in sight, maybe the kindest thing you can do for everyone is to save your remembrance and write it in a card to the family of the deceased, or if it's appropriate, maybe a little tribute like we see on social media sometimes. You could post it like that.
That's a great idea. On the other hand, though, if no one is giving a tribute to the deceased and there's that awkward silence, it would show kindness to the family if you maybe get the ball rolling, stand up and say something, even if you're not especially inclined to do it. You'll have to pray for wisdom and discern in that moment if perhaps you might be the icebreaker to inspire others to speak. So, again, wisdom and discernment. Another aspect of the comportment that we're talking about is the way we dress for funerals. Our dress can demonstrate respect or disrespect.
That's right, Amy. Ladies, in a civilized society, we dress appropriately for the occasion, not necessarily expensively. Some people, conflate expensive and appropriate. You don't have to spend a lot of money to dress appropriately. Generally speaking, the following things I'm about to list are inappropriate for funerals. And yes, I have seen almost all of these at one funeral or another. Visible cleavage. Keep those girls under wraps, ladies. Fishnet stockings. I'm not even sure where you would buy those these days, ladies, but we don't want to wear those to a funeral. Mid-thigh or shorter skirts and dresses. Keep the legs covered up too. Stiletto heels. Excessive bling, makeup, hair, just keep it understated and classy. Jeans, shorts, flip-flops, camouflage, that's mostly for my neck of the woods, Amy. Baseball caps, leather pants, overalls. Anything else come to mind, Amy?
Yeah, sports jerseys, Go Pack Go is kind of the religion up here in Wisconsin. So in my neck of the woods, those seem a little out of place. Same with snarky t-shirt messages or anything else that draws attention away from the service and onto you. So, of course, there could be some exceptions, such as if a baseball player dies and people just want to wear their baseball caps and jerseys to honor him or something like that. But, if you look in the mirror and you look like you did when you used to go clubbing or to a picnic or to mow the lawn, you need to change. A, you're going to church, and B, somebody just died. So yes, show some respect. Ladies, whatever the rest of your wardrobe looks like, you need one decent modest dress, suit, or skirt, and a blouse in a muted color that could be worn to a wedding, funeral, or job interview.
Right. And all of those things, decent, modest, and muted color, are important. I went to a funeral several years ago for an older relative. And most of the attendees were older. It was in a very traditional church where everything was proper and appropriate. And I will never forget this younger relative who had sometimes been a source of strife in the family came in after everyone was seated, just as the service was about to start. And she walked right up the center aisle of the church in this bright red dress and sat down near the front.
Oh my.
It wasn't just the dress, but she made herself, like you were saying, the center of attention. And unless you're the one in the casket, you're not supposed to be the center of attention at a funeral. So, ladies, understated is the key. Men need at least one decent suit and tie, or slacks, dress shirt, and sports jacket and tie for the same reason. No, jeans are not slacks. No, a denim or athletic jacket is not a suit or sport jacket. If you don't want to put out a lot of money because you don't often dress that way, go to a thrift store. I mean, a lot of times you can find brand new clothes with the tags still on for a very low price. Or if you're really hard pressed, you can borrow an appropriate outfit from a friend.
Oh, great idea. You know, something else we always have to take into account these days is our phones. So just make sure your ringer is turned off before the service starts.
Yeah, make sure you have a dead ringer at the funeral.
Oh,
Sorry,
boo.
go ahead, Amy. Go ahead.
All right, Michelle, make sure your ringer is off. And although we don't often call a funeral a social event, that's exactly what this is. Don't bury your head in your phone when you're there. You're there to interact with the people, so be sociable. There may be lulls during a visitation or wake when it's okay to unobtrusively check your texts or social media, but staying on your phone through the majority of these services is never okay. And what about taking pictures? You know, a funeral is an event where you are likely to run into an old friend or relative that you haven't seen in a long time. If you'd like to get a picture together, step into a private room or outside, somewhere away from the general activity of the wake or funeral, and definitely not in front of the casket. And finally, I think most of us would agree, don't take pictures or selfies with the deceased person. If you absolutely have to do it for some legitimate reason, at least wait until no one else is around and keep it off of social media.
Yeah, Amy, I'm trying to imagine a legitimate reason why anybody would possibly need to take a selfie with someone who's in a casket. I mean, that's worse than my dead ringer joke. I guess maybe if you have a boss where you have to prove to your boss that you had to take time off, where you actually had to go to a funeral or something, but maybe you need a new boss or something.
Take a picture in front of take a picture in front of the hearse outside or something. Then
yeah, that would be a better idea.
Or just show them the obituary notice, I think. But, you know, a couple generations ago, I just remember in my grandparents' time, it was very common to take pictures. I've got some, at least two pictures in an old scrapbook somewhere of black and whites of somebody who's died in our family. So it must have been more common way back when. But these days, it's frowned upon.
Yeah. And especially don't put them on Facebook. My goodness. Please don't do things like that.
Oh, yes, no.
All righty. Moving right along. When you go to a funeral, if you have children, you need to be mindful of your children. Wakes and funerals are mind-numbingly boring for small children who don't know what's going on, and it can even be scary for them too. If you have small children and you're attending a wake or a funeral, or your family of the deceased, you may want to consider getting a babysitter. In fact, if the wake or funeral is being held at a church, it would be a wonderful gesture on the church's part to have someone trustworthy to volunteer to take the children of the deceased family members to the nursery or another kid-friendly room and let them run around and play and feed them and just take care of them so you don't have to worry about them during this difficult time.
That's a great idea. I just was remembering a story from, a long time ago. I confess that when our oldest was just like 18 months, maybe even younger, he was walking though, and I turned my head. A visitation was just starting, and I lost track of him for just a brief moment at this visitation, and I was horrified to see him playing peekaboo with people behind this clear plexiglass pulpit stand. So people were smiling, but I was not smiling at all. So thankfully, we were able to whisk him away and outside pretty quickly. I wish that we had found a sitter for sure. However, if a babysitter isn't an option, whether you're a family member or simply an attendee, you really must supervise and control your child. So if he makes a fuss during the service, take him out to the lobby or outside until he calms down. And by all means, don't let him run free in the church or funeral home during the wake or visitation. First of all, there will be many strangers coming and going, and these days you just can't be too careful about abductions and abuse, even in a church. And second, your child could break something or hurt himself or run out into the parking lot or street, and there's no need to compound the sadness and tragedy of this day any more than that. So furthermore, it really is awkward for the pastor or someone else to come to a grieving family and just ask them to please control their child because he's disturbing or upsetting others or destroying something.
Yeah, that could be difficult for a pastor to have to do, or your friends or family or whatever. All right, let's talk turkey and other funeral food.
Okay.
Amy, I think it's just tattooed on the DNA of every church lady that when somebody dies, you take food to the family.
Yes.
And it can be a very practical way to serve the grieving. I mean, they'll probably have a number of family members in from out of town or a number of visitors, and nobody wants to think about cooking or the expense of a restaurant at a time like that. Ladies, if you're not sure what to bring, whether you're taking it to the family's home or to the church for an after funeral meal, you're probably safe with a cake or a deli tray, meat and cheese so people can make little sandwiches, or a fruit and vegetable tray or something like that. If you're attending the funeral, but you're not a family member, do understand that the food that has been brought is for the family, even if it's all laid out in the fellowship hall and looks like a potluck. This is not an open buffet unless you have specifically been invited or some sort of general announcement has been made that all of the funeral attendees are welcome to stay and eat.
All right. And another way that we can serve the family and honor the deceased is through a memorial donation. If you'd like to make a memorial donation to a charity or other organization in memory of the deceased, be certain it's an organization that the deceased would have supported, especially if you're considering one that hasn't been suggested by the family. For example, I would love it if when I die, people would donate to a local organization, in my case called VITA, which means life, and it's a pro-life medical facility up in our area that has this state-of-the-art 4D sonogram machine, several of them, in fact, that have been donated, as well as a home for single moms and support for the families, free pregnancy testing. Of course, they're not going to encourage abortion or anything like that. Many other services. I'd rather have memorial donations go there instead of sending flowers, but I'd just absolutely turn over in my grave if someone made a donation in my name to, say, Joel Osteen, Joyce Meyer, T.D. Jakes, or any other person or organization that is not doctrinally sound. This is also something you can discuss with your family before you die and include in your funeral pre-planning.
Yeah, that's right. It's one of those things that you want to get settled before you die and nobody can ask you. That's for sure.
Yes.
All right. Well, let's turn our thoughts to some little ways that churches and pastors can serve grieving families during funerals and wakes. And by the way, I keep saying wakes. I know the modern term is visitation. That's just showing how old I am, to say.
Oh, no, actually, I think down in the South, they say wakes more often because wakes are what traditionally the Catholics call them. Visitations are kind of more of a Protestant thing, at least up here. But I think in other regions, it can go either way. So wakes can definitely mean visitation.
Yeah,
so it's a regional thing.
Yeah, and I think it's also a holdover from the day. The term originally came, ladies, from the time when they would sit up with the body to make sure it wasn't going to wake up, or to be there
really?
if it did, I guess. So that's where the term comes from. And for me, it's just habit to call it a wake instead of a visitation. But what are some little ways that churches and pastors can take care of and show love for those grieving families during these times? Well, churches should be funeral friendly. So make sure your signage is up to date so that non-church members will know where the sanctuary and the bathrooms and the fellowship hall and all of that are. Make sure the bathrooms are clean and well stocked with paper towels, soap, toilet paper, and all those things. And while we're on the subject of bathrooms, I've been in some churches like this, correct any plumbing problems or at least put up some signs indicating that a toilet is out of order or that you have to hold the handle down or whatever. Your church members might know about these things, but visitors don't. So this is also a good idea for just regular Sunday morning church visitors. You'll want to provide plenty of well-placed Kleenex boxes in the sanctuary and other rooms that family members might use. And if you can, provide a family room if that's possible. Sometimes family members just need a moment alone. Another thing, pastors, I love you, brothers, but breath mints and deodorant. Enough said. And if you're conducting a funeral in the South in the heat of summer, a simple, elegant, and brief service at the gravesite is usually welcomed by the family and the attendees. And I would assume the same goes for pastors in the North during the dead of winter, right, Amy?
Oh, absolutely, Michelle. Nobody should have to go to the ER for frostbite because a graveside service was too long. And believe me, up here in northern Wisconsin, we do have graveside services in the winter. Even if the ground is frozen, the equipment can still get in there. So, just saying. So those are some ways that we can show respect for the deceased and care for the family, specifically at the wake, visitation, funeral, those remembrances. But what about ministering to the bereaved in general? Well, the Bible is very clear that because God is a God of love and comfort, we are to offer love and comfort to those who are grieving. Romans 12:15 tells us to weep with those who weep. And 2 Corinthians 1 verses 3 and 4 says, "Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies, and God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our affliction, so that we may be able to comfort those who are in any affliction with the comfort with which we ourselves are comforted by God."
That's right, Amy. Comforting and grieving with those who grieve is a ministry for which God has generally gifted, shaped, and equipped women in a way that's unique and discreet from the ways that He has generally gifted, shaped, and equipped men. Certainly, pastors and other men can do and should minister much needed compassion toward those under their care. And most Christians can attest to how helpful good pastoral care has been during a time of grief. But there's also something special in the way a godly woman can minister to the heart of a hurting woman and her family that should be nurtured and encouraged in the body of Christ.
Now, I agree, Michelle. As believers, we have the desire to minister to those who are hurting, but sometimes it's hard to know what to say. You want to offer words of comfort and hope, and you certainly don't want to make things worse. We've all heard stories about well-meaning people who have said some really insensitive things that have caused further pain to the bereaved. So let's consider just a few thoughts on ministering to those who have lost someone dear to them. One of the best ways to help someone who's grieving is to pray. Pray fervently for your heartbroken friend, asking God to comfort and heal her heart, provide for any material needs she has, and any other, specifics that you know of. Also ask God to give you wisdom to know the right things to say and do.
Right. And it's important to remember that your words can't fix things. All of us who have suffered know that nobody's words can fix things as much as we want them to. It's hard to watch someone suffer. And as godly, tender-hearted, nurturing women, there's often nothing we want more than to take all that pain away and just make that sufferer happy again. Sometimes we ladies have it in the back of our minds that if we can just find the exact right combination of words to say in the exact right comforting tone, we can take away the pain of the person that we're comforting. But we can't. And if you've ever lost someone close to you, you know this is true. But it's especially important to remember this when we're comforting someone, because the more we talk, searching for those magic words that will help, the greater risk we run of sticking our foot in our mouths and saying something hurtful instead of helpful.
Oh, yeah. And also when a grieving person's emotions are raw, it can be extremely grating to listen to someone talk on and on and on. So we would do well to take a lesson from Job's friends in Job chapter 2, which tells us that Job's 3 friends made an appointment together to come to show Job sympathy and comfort him. And they raised their voices and wept, and they tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their heads toward heaven. And they sat with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his suffering was very great. And remember, it was only after these guys opened their mouths that the trouble began, because what they told him wasn't biblical.
Exactly. So make sure whatever you choose to say is doctrinally sound. This is where Job's friends got in trouble and went off the rails. They tried to, quote unquote, minister to Job with unbiblical theology. Heaven did not gain another angel with the death of your friend's loved one. People, even Christians, do not turn into angels when they die. If the deceased wasn't saved, he has not gone to a better place or gone to be with Jesus, nor will he rest in peace nor is it true that at least he's not suffering anymore. Don't say something like this unless you're relatively certain the person was saved, as evidenced by the fruit of his life. If you're thinking about saying something theological-ish to your friend and you're not sure whether or not it's biblically accurate, either take the time to find out first or err on the side of caution and don't say it.
Yeah, he's not smiling down either, but yeah, regardless of his eternal state. But one thing that's always the right thing to say is something like, I'm praying for you. Yeah, I've heard many grieving families say this is one of the most comforting things they can hear, especially if they know you to be someone who is faithful in prayer. They know you're going to do it. So don't, say you're going to be praying for your friend if you don't really mean it. If you're afraid you'll forget to pray for her, just set a reminder on your phone or stick a note on your bathroom mirror or tie a string around your finger, whatever it takes and whatever you have to do to remember. From time to time, just remember to let your friend know that you're still praying for her.
Yeah, that's really important and a great kindness as well. And you can also say, can I pray with you, or can I pray for you?
Yes.
There might be a moment at the wake or during a visit when it's appropriate to offer to pray with your friend or pray for her out loud just between the two of you. Ask God for wisdom to know if it's the right time and to give you the right words to pray. Also ask the Lord to help you know if praying for your friend out loud while you're with her would be encouraging to her. If it's a situation where, like, your friend is unsaved or enraged at God over her loved one's death, it might not be helpful at the moment, and it might be better for you to pray for her by yourself after you get home. So ask God to comfort your friend and provide for her needs. Ask him to help her to know that he is there for her and to strengthen her and to strengthen her trust in him.
Yeah, something else that's really kind to say is just a simple, I love you. It just lets your friend know that you care and are grieving with her. If the timing seems right, you might wish to also share a special memory of the deceased or recount how much he or she meant to you. You can also share scripture with your friend. If there was a particular verse or passage focusing on God's goodness or comfort that brought you peace and strength when a loved one died, that might be the one to share. Recite it to your friend or jot it down in a nice note of sympathy. Just make sure that you're rightly handling the passage before you share it, and be certain that it applies to someone who has just lost a loved one and that it doesn't appear to promise your friend something that God didn't mean to promise her personally.
Yeah, that's right, because we don't want, what is starting out as a kind gesture to end up being discouraging, because, God supposedly promised somebody something and then he supposedly doesn't follow through on that. So make sure it's doctrinally sound and in context and everything. Well, another thing is that following up can mean the world to those who have lost a loved one. There's some people in this world who are very, what I call, calendar gifted. They remember every birthday, every anniversary, every significant date, and they send a card or a note, or they commemorate the day in a way that makes the recipient feel like the most special person in the world. I unfortunately do not have that gift, and I am in awe of
me either.
Really, it's hard to have that. I mean, it's hard to do that if you don't really are not gifted that way. But I am in awe of people who do have that gift. And if that's one of your giftings, put it to work in ministry by reaching out to your friend on her loved one's birthday or the anniversary of his death or their wedding anniversary or other special days that might be hard for her. And what a blessing you'll be to your friend if you do that.
That's great advice, Michelle. And, everyone worries about saying the right thing to comfort someone who's grieving. Sometimes the best thing you can say is nothing at all. Just weep with those who weep. But what are some things that we definitely shouldn't say? Well, don't say something you wouldn't want to hear if you had just lost a loved one. Matthew 7:12 says, it's about the golden rule, and it reminds us to treat others the way we would want to be treated. This is a very helpful filter when it comes to what to say or what not to say to your grieving friend. If your friend's child has died, think about your own children. What if one of them died? Would you want to hear, well, at least you have other children, or you're still young, you can have more children? Yeah, probably not. Also, in a way, this falls under the don't say unbiblical things category. While these statements may be factually true, Christians recognize that every individual is uniquely created in the image of God. Other children can never replace the one who was lost.
Right. And also, don't try to give a theological treatise on why the person died. You've probably heard people say things like, God wanted your loved one to be with him, or he had finished the work that God gave him to do, or God decided it was his time to go, or God wanted to spare him further suffering, and things like this. The bereaved person almost certainly doesn't want to hear it. You don't have chapter and verse scripture to back up any kind of statement like this. And it also smacks of trying to let God off the hook for allowing the person to die. Your friend is probably already wondering why God ended the person's life at this time. You don't have the answer, and it's prideful to think that you do. Nobody needs you to wax theologically eloquent on why the person died. So don't.
Yeah. Here's another one you'll probably need to ask the Lord wisdom about. Have you ever heard somebody say, hey, don't tell the grieving person, if there's any way I can help, let me know. Grieving people, they're overwhelmed, so don't say that. They can't think of what they need in the moment, and later they may feel uncomfortable asking for your help. Just find something helpful and just do it. Okay, we've all probably heard or read this advice about how to help the bereaved. So don't ask, just go over and clean her house, or go buy her groceries, or take her a meal, or whatever. That's kind of goes along with what we've heard. Well, if you're extraordinarily close to the bereaved person and know all of the ins and outs of her household, this might be helpful. But if you're simply a friend from church or the next door neighbor, it's probably not wise to just go do something without checking with your friend first to find out if what you think would be helpful would actually be helpful.
Right. I mean, you don't want to just show up with a meal on the same night 3 other ladies have just shown up with a meal and a 4th one has already taken your friend out to dinner.
Yeah.
You don't want to just show up with perishable groceries when other people have already packed her fridge. You don't want to just show up to clean her house when somebody already cleaned it yesterday, Instead, think of 2 or 3 things to suggest to your friend and ask her if that would help her. Could I bring dinner for your family one night this week? Or I know you have a house full of people and you probably haven't had time to do laundry. How about I take it to my house and take care of that for you? Or could I drop your kids off at school tomorrow morning? Is there something else I could do that would be more helpful than what I just suggested? Giving your friend some choice and some control over what's happening may be a lot more helpful than just showing up unexpectedly.
And if your friend is overwhelmed by seeing people and making these decisions, maybe you could offer to be an intermediary. I don't think I've ever seen anything quite as helpful as someone who steps up to handle and coordinate things between the family of the deceased and others who want to help. And now an intermediary can be, the so-called bad guy who explains to surprise visitors that the bereaved person is resting and isn't up for a visit right now. She can organize a meal or a grocery schedule, fill people in on funeral arrangements, and field those "what can I do to help" questions, and assign tasks that the bereaved person needs done. Just be sure you're being extremely kind and gentle and humble to the people that you're dealing with. You don't, want to come off as, a guard or being bossy or a domineering gatekeeper. That is not helpful or Christ-like. So if you're someone who is good at understanding and carrying out someone else's wishes or instructions, offer to step into this gap for your friend and be sure to reassure her that your feelings won't be hurt if she doesn't want or need this, or if she'd rather someone else do it.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I think that could be really helpful to someone who is she's grieving so much that she just can't focus on those little details of what she needs somebody to do for her or whatever. Well, listeners, we hope our ideas and advice in this episode have been helpful. It's impossible to cover every little contingency surrounding death and funerals, but we're going to try to give you a little more help next week in our final episode of this series. You sent in some great questions for our Glad You Asked episode, and we did our best to answer them biblically and practically. So be sure to to catch part 3 of our Dying, Death, and Funeral series next week.
Yes, and don't forget to stop by our website, awordfitlyspoken.life, and check out all the resources that we have there for you. You know, we don't often mention our resources tab on our website, but if you click on it, you can find links to several helpful websites, plus the links to Michelle's blog and my 2 websites, Berean Research and Naomi's Table. So if you like what you hear on A Word Fitly Spoken, check out our individual websites for even more information and links.
And until next time, ask the Lord to use you to minister to those who are grieving and walk worthy.